Hi, I'm Clocks, and this is the first video in my 6-week course for tutting fundamentals. Let's start at the beginning. What is tutting? Well, basically, it's a form of street dance where people display right angles and squares with their body. Yes, other angles are part of tutting, but for fundamentals, we'll stick to right angles. That might look like a lot, but the choices I'm making are all fairly simple once you understand a few key principles. You see, each of those choices are part of a way of thinking, or a system. And if you can recognize individual systems and smoothly transition those systems into each other, then you can find yourself tutting in exciting and curious ways very quickly. So that's what I'm going to do. In this course, I will teach you one tutting system every week, how to recognize it, and then connect it to what we learned the previous weeks to establish a fundamental understanding of the dance of tutting and how to expand your curiosity within it. Let's begin. The lesson for this week is a concept called fixed point. Now, fixed point is a mind technique that lets you move at least two parts of your body in exact opposition to each other to create the illusion that some part of you remains still through the movement. Yeah? We've seen different ideas, different versions of this before. Now, this is relevant to tutting by way of something tutters commonly refer to as the grid. The grid is an imaginary canvas that surrounds you, the dancer, upon which to display and move your angles. Think of it like three-dimensional graph paper all around you. When you learn to see it, you can simply align your body with it and guiding your body in its movement through tutting. Now, why is that important to tutting? Because it helps orient you and your angles in space. One of the biggest issues beginning tutters have is simply spatial awareness. Are their hands as flat as possible? Are their elbows too high or maybe too low for the shape they're making? By imagining the grid in your mind's eye, you can more accurately display the shapes you want. But it's not enough to simply show one still shape. This is a dance after all, and we will need to know how to learn to move our angles from one part of the grid to another. And one of the simplest, most intuitive ways of doing this is through the concept of fixed point. Now, miming fixed point has two things moving in opposition to each other. When one thing, if I want to keep this hand still, I am doing two things. I am moving both my body towards if I want to keep this still, I want to push my body towards my hand and my hand towards my body. So they're going in opposition. So this is coming in as this is also pulling in. That's basically what's happening. And if I want to do the reverse, I'm going to pull my body away while also pushing my arm away. The idea in general is that I'm creating oppositional forces that end up ultimately neutralizing any kind of movement that would normally happen. If both my body and my arm were just moving in the same direction, it would create either like a telescoping effect outward or a telescoping effect inward. But if I can push my body out while I pull my hand in, that creates that opposition. And same thing in reverse. If I can push my body out, but if I push my body back, but push my hand out, then my hand stays in place as long as those two motions are going equivalent speeds, right? Eventually, if you decide to go back too fast, faster than how far you're pushing out, you will create the experience of your hand moving from point A to point B ever so slightly. So that's just something to watch out for. Those timings must be similar. But the idea in general is not so much that we have to be perfect mimes. All we need to do is learn how to hold one space. That's it. If we can hold a point in space and learn how to move around it, That can help us a great deal. Now, you don't have to be a master at this. We're not gonna spend a whole lot of time just working on this one concept. You just need to understand the general idea of holding a point in space and then being able to move around that point if possible, if need be. This is going to take a little bit of practice, so don't worry about it if you don't get it right away. But keep that idea in mind, and you can train this in multiple ways. One by looking at a mirror, and another way by having light behind you. The light will cast shadows, and you'll be able to see exaggerated versions of all of your movement and whether or not you're moving at all one way or another. All right, so how do we make a tut? Like I said before, tutting is effectively creating right angles and squares in this fundamentals course. We'll expand to other shapes later, but for right now, we're just focusing on squares and right angles. If I wanted to make a right angle with my body, I'm using 4 points and 3 joints. Those 4 points are the shoulder, the elbow, and the wrist, which also happen to be the 3 joints, but the extra point is the end of your fingertips. So that's the 4 points, 1, 2, 3, 4 on both sides. Now I'm going to use those points to create a right angle here. So now I've got this nice right angle in this specific position. Whenever we are making tuts, choosing to make any kind of shape, we can change them based on these 4 points, the 3 joints, right? All I'm doing is I'm thinking about shoulders, elbows, and wrists. That's basically it. If I can think about those 3 points, it really helps narrow it down. So if I'm only showing you something in my wrist, then that's great. Let's just start here. And what I'm going to do is we're going to explain this concept with fixed point at the same time through a little bit of demonstration. So in order for this concept to make sense, we're going to have to talk about the grid a little bit. Remember that the grid, what I talked about earlier, was this concept of like 3-dimensional graph paper that's all around you. You have these 3 axes, right? You have your y-axis, your x-axis, and your z-axis. That's what we're going to use. Now, I'm going to show that we're going to combine all 3 of those concepts, the points and joints, the fixed point, and the grid all at once to create a canvas and a way to move a tut through the canvas. Let's just use this one tut through a fixed point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this tut the same. I am not going to change the angle. I'm not going to move the wrist. I'm going to move everything around it. I'm going to move the whole thing in space, but I'm not going to change the angle of the wrist. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this fixed point right here. I'm going to take any point and I'm going to pass it through. Now, I'm not just going to pass it through any old way. I'm going to pass it through based on those 3 axes. And I'm going to make sure that the movement is always aligned on either the X, Y, or Z axis. So here, I have my fixed point, I'm going to move along the X axis. Boom. Now I've got my fixed point, I'm going to move along the Y axis. Boom. Now I've got my fixed point, and I'm going to rotate to the Z axis. Boom. Now I'm going to pull back on that Z axis. Boom. Now if I continue this, you can see that just by holding one point, I can create a lot of different shapes just by holding that one point in space. I'm using a little bit of rotation, but I'm not changing the tut itself. I'm only changing the context of the tut. I'm not changing the form of the tut itself. We can go over that a little bit later. But for right now, that's all we're talking about. That's all we're doing, is just being able to move that tut through space just like that. And what we're going to try to do is we want to make sure that we can get that tut, one, clean. We want to make sure that we're not ducking as much as possible. We want to be as flat as possible. Yeah. Don't worry if your fingers bow or bend, or maybe you have you don't quite get it. Get as close to flat as you possibly can, and then we'll go from there. We're going to keep this shape as clean and right angle as possible. Use a mirror or film yourself if you have to, and then we're going to keep this fixed point fixed as much as possible. So we want to keep all of those pieces nice and clean so that when we move through this space, the tut moves smoothly through that specific fixed point. Now let's move on to switch fixed point. So we've got one fixed point here. I take this fixed point right here, I'm going to tut through it. Boom. Cool. Now what? Okay, now I'm going to do this. I'm going to switch where the fixed point is. Now I can move the fixed point to here, and I can move everything around this. Now, to make things fun, to make things a little bit easier, one thing you can do to help your fixed point really help you keep your tutting connected, to keep it all in the flow. In your mind's eye, picture, you can use your hand if it feels comfortable to draw along it, but to picture that the fixed point is traveling and only can find a place along your tut. So if my fixed point started here and I want to move it somewhere higher, then I'm going to use my tut to get there. Great, now I can do all of these kinds of things. And now I want to lower the fixed point, so now I'm going to lower it to here. Boom, boom, boom. Right? And all of that was just me switching where the fixed point was. And finally, we have the last piece of our fixed point puzzle, which is being able to switch the fixed point from one hand to another. So in this scenario, we have two tuts that are exactly the same. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have one fixed point here in my mind, and I'm going to move the other tut along that fixed point, just like we were doing earlier. But this time that fixed point happens to be on my tut. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to move a little bit. I'm going to do some fun pieces, some fun transitions to it. Okay, now I'm here. I have moved, I've made sure that all of those things I am simply tracing. We're gonna do more on tracing later, but all I'm doing is I'm allowing there to be contact along the X, Y, and Z axis. And then if I rotate, I always maintain contact with the fixed point. I am never out of contact with where the fixed point is until I choose a new fixed point. So now my fixed point is going to be this wrist, and I'm going to move this other thing, this other arm, this other tut, in the same way that I was moving earlier to create another fixed point. Now, if you notice that last time I smoothed the fixed point down to the bottom. So I'm going to think about that fixed point being at the bottom until I choose, you guessed it, a new fixed point for what I can use. And all I'm doing is I'm thinking about 4 points, 3 joints. Every time there's a joint, that's your shoulder, your elbow, or your wrist, or your fingertip, right? Those 4 points. That's what I'm connecting to. I'm always touching fingertip to fingertip, or fingertip to wrist, or fingertip to elbow. If I eventually will get fingertip to shoulder, right? You can do all of those pieces. And all I'm doing is sliding them across the X, Y, and Z axis to create really nice, satisfying fixed point tuts without needing to memorize any specific kind of tutting patterns. You just need to understand the system behind it, and then it becomes much, much easier. Let's finish up with one large tut with both arms. Let's connect both of these together. I'm just going to connect them right here for a really simple idea. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. And I'm going to think about using those points and switching where the fixed point is. So if I decide that I'm going to use my elbow as a fixed point, I can simply rotate that until the entire picture is now perfectly X, Y, and Z axis different. Now I can also slide through that fixed point. You see that? That's basically how it would work. I would do the same thing without pointing out where the fixed point is. Just creating that stair-step pattern that exists in my arms already. And then if I wanted to move that here, I could rotate it here, just along this specific point. If I wanted to rotate it along the middle, I could do that. If I wanted to rotate it along the elbow, I could drop it here. If I wanted to move everything through this point on a stair step up, I would go up, in, up, boom. If I wanted to stair step from here, I could go over, up, over, up. And then I could turn the whole thing and I could move it all the way over here. And then I could do the exact opposite, boom, boom, boom. And if I wanted to go just elbow, 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 elbow. But that would be the idea of using both arms. Notice how at no point did I ever change the position of my wrists. All of this is just using the context. I'm not changing the form, I'm not changing my wrists. I'm just allowing the context of one big shape with both of my arms to move through the X, Y, and Z axis by either sliding on the X, Y, and Z axis or being locked to a fixed point, moving around it, radially, basically. And that's how we can begin to understand the grid around us, which will be helpful when we begin to understand the grid within us in our next video. See you next time.